China plans to build a modern-day Silk Road connecting China, Central Asia and Europe, and that took a big step forward last month with the purchase of the Greek Port of Piraeus. Beijing's One Belt, One Road initiative is designed to deepen trade ties across Asia, the Indian Ocean region and Europe by land and sea. For Greece, the $320 million deal marks the second major privatization for the bankrupt country since last year. Later, we'll talk with several experts about the political and economic impact for the region and beyond. But we begin in Athens with CCTV's Filio Kontrafouri. And Filio, China has been looking to expand its One Belt, One Road initiative, and Greece has been struggling economically. So what does this deal mean for both countries?
Well, that's right, Anna. And actually, the fact that this deal was signed at the Greek Prime Minister's office in a very big and elaborate ceremony, it only shows the importance that this deal has for both sides, where both sides are realizing the potential that the Port of Piraeus has. Now, Greece has embarked in a very ambitious privatization program that has not exactly going quite well. And Greece hopes now with this investment that this will attract even more similar investments at a time that is very difficult for the Greek economy. And it is a deal that here it is seen as a confidence vote for Greece during these very difficult times. At the same time, both the government and many economists say that it is investments like this one that China has made at the port of Piraeus that are the key for Greece to return to an economic growth, because such investments not only mean more revenue for the state, but even more importantly, they mean more jobs, and in a country where officially 1 in 4 is unemployed. On the other hand, China is aiming really highball here, aiming to turn the Port of Piraeus into Europe's largest port hub and the main gate for Chinese exports into Europe. Now, the Port of Piraeus is a faster route compared to other northern European alternatives, so that makes maritime transport even more cost-effective. And given that COSCO already attracts multinationals like Samsung Electronics, when its operations expand at the Port of Piraeus, that means that even more businesses will have access to even more markets, Anand.
Thanks, Filio. That's CCTV's Filio Kontrafouri reporting from Athens. Joining us to talk about all this is George Zogopoulos. He's a researcher with the International European Training Center and the founder of ChinaandGreece.com. He joins us from Istanbul. With us from London is Linda Yue, an economist and author. She's currently an economics professor at the London Business School. And Zhang Shishuye joins us from Beijing. He is a professor and the deputy director of the Institute of European Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Thanks to all of you. Zhang Shishuye, let me start with you. When we look at this Chinese investment in the port of Piraeus, how does it fit into China's broader One Belt, One Road economic plan?
Well, as you know, that some people say that the so-called One Belt, One Road is a kind of a concept. But, well, I would say it's really something, as we say, it's a kind of the so-called ground project. And it's, it can be said that it's a basket. You can put everything in it. We have policy coordination, the so-called international financial trade, and also investment, and also people-to-people contact. So, as you know, that more than 2/3 of China's products for the European market are transported by sea. So, if China can control that kind of a port in Greece, and that will save lots of money. It is reported that by transferring products to that port, I think the whole journey can save 7 days or 10 days. So that's a big save of capital for China. So that will be a greater benefit for China's trade with Europe and with other parts of the world.
Linda, of course, this is a Chinese investment in the Greek port of Piraeus, but is China here thinking far more ambitiously? Is it, as Shishuye just pointed out, going to be the gateway to European domestic markets for China?
I think Greece is one gateway. China has also invested actually quite a lot around the European Union. For instance, bought assets in Portugal, as well as investing much more broadly, even in places like Germany and the UK developed markets. But I think what Greece offers, of course, is the opportunity to buy key strategic assets like ports, which would help China in terms of its, you mentioned there, the One Belt, One Road, the Silk Road policy, where China is pushing itself commercially into Central Asia and into Europe. And I think the other thing probably to say is China's interest in Europe is hastened by the fact that it's easier for the Chinese to invest in Europe than in America, because in the United States, there's greater scrutiny given to Chinese investments, especially if there's state financing involved. By contrast, countries like Greece, which are in a rescue program, in other words, is being bailed out by the International Monetary Fund and by the European Union, it needs to sell assets in order to raise money. And so far, this is one of the biggest privatizations in Greece, and Greece is actually quite far behind in terms of the amount of assets it's supposed to be selling. So that gives you, I think, a glimpse as to why it is for both countries. I think in this instance, it may actually be quite a good deal.
So, George, Greece needs to sell assets to raise money. How does this investment by the Chinese help Greece?
Well, China plays a very important role in that regard since 2009, and the recent deal is very important for two reasons. The first is that China will give some money to Greece and will invest more. And the second is that this investment can give a signal possibly to additional investors in Greece that this government or any next government will be prepared to sell more state-owned enterprise. I find it very critical, especially for the time this happened, and possibly this new Greek government can make a new beginning in terms of implementing privatization, because the progress of Greece in that regard since 2009 has been rather poor. The Port of Piraeus can be a beginning towards this direction.
Shashwaya, if we look at the bilateral relationship between China and Greece, how does this fit into China's overall strategy to strengthen the relationship with Greece?
Well, as you know, that China and Greece have established the so-called strategic partnership, and in the past, also China got some help from Greece by shifting the Chinese from Libya and other parts of the world. So China is quite happy about Greece's kindness. So now Greece is in economic difficulty. So China has this kind of willingness to help Greece by making investment in this country. So it's a win-win situation for China and Greece.
Linda, if we look at trade routes around the world, we can see that, for instance, the Port of Piraeus here is the nearest port, North Mediterranean port, to the Suez Canal. And as Shashwaya pointed out earlier in the show, this would speed up Chinese exports to their markets by something like 7 to 10 days, 7 to 11 days. How significant is that, the fact that goods can get to market far quicker?
It is very important. Even though China has rebalanced its economy so that services is now a bigger part of its growth engine than manufacturing in terms of exports and transport and security of transport, of course, anything that facilitates trade would be a huge plus, especially at a time, if you look at global trade, it's actually stalled. So global trade really could use a boost. And I would say for China, the import of raw materials, the export of manufactured goods, anything that makes that easier, especially along the Silk Road as China expands its trade links beyond the Asian region, I think will be quite important. But I think beyond that, a port is a real asset. And I think if you look at where China is investing, they've done better in terms of investing in real assets like ports, like buying machinery. For instance, in the financial sector, some financial investments over the past few years haven't been as profitable. So I think in one sense, this would actually be better anyways for Chinese overseas investment, which is the next push, because China doesn't just want to push trade these days, it wants to push outward investment. But I should just quickly add that we shouldn't overlook the fact that there is resistance within Greece, of course, selling off national assets is controversial, and there have been protests, especially by workers who are worried about the takeover by a Chinese company, because when China invests overseas, it often brings its own people, and employment is always one of those concerns whenever you have this kind of privatization. And this, we should just mention that this is certainly the case here as well.
George, what kind of opposition is there in Greece to this type of investment that we're seeing?
Well, every time China talks about the investment of COSCO in the port of Piraeus, it describes it as the dragon's head in its investments in Greece. This means that additional investments will come. And also the experience from the very first sale of the port of Piraeus, of Piraeus 2 and 3 since 2009, suggests that China can do more in Piraeus, and more Greek companies and other companies from all over the world can benefit by this deal. And what is highly important is not only that China will give some money to the Greek state, but it is prepared to make investment approximately worth of 1.5 billion euros. Of course, some problems are still here. It is the refugee crisis and the railway, which remains closed and was closed for a period of approximately 1 month. And obviously, the Greek parliament has also to vote for the new agreement for the sale of the Piraeus Port Authority. But I believe that all this will overcome very soon, and that additional projects for China, like, for example, the construction of a high-speed railway which can connect Piraeus and then Central and Eastern Europe via the Balkans, can be soon constructed, and this will be very positive not only for the Greek economy but also for the European economy.
And Zhang Shishui, when we look at that railway connection link that George was just talking about, is that another key component of the One Belt, One Road initiative, the fact that there would be these rail links to the Balkans and to Central and Eastern Europe as well?
Yes, the so-called One Belt, One Road has this kind of a component, which means that China wants to have more roads, railroads, sea routes connecting China and other parts of the world. But for the railroad you mentioned, as far as I can read from the Chinese newspapers, I don't think China is going to make any bidding for this project because there's not enough time. But if there is a chance, I think China will be quite interested in this kind of railroad. And China wants to make contributions to this kind of facility, transportation, just between Greece and other parts of Europe.
Linda, when we look at the Port of Piraeus, it is, of course, at the center of what used to be the center of trade and commerce in the ancient world. And when you look at this kind of investment right now, can this region regain its place? Is there a huge growth opportunity here for the Mediterranean?
I think so. I know there's a lot of hand-wringing over growth in the so-called peripheral Europe. So I'm talking about the rescued countries along the south, including Greece, but also obviously Portugal. But I think if you look at where the center of world economic gravity is, so the rise of China and the recovery of America, the center of world economic activity actually sits pretty squarely in the Mediterranean and that region. So if there could be much better trade links, much more open investment regimes, less regulation, all the things that companies need to reach different markets. I think there's a huge potential, but that's not to underemphasize the challenges that a country like Greece and some of its neighbors faces, because what we have seen during the European crisis, the Euro crisis, and specifically since Greece was first found some funny numbers back in 2010 and was rescued, the competitiveness and productivity challenge of the region is considerable. And for them to overcome that will require a lot of reforms to very strict labor market rules, things that are difficult to reform, but also being able to pick up more know-how and transfers of knowledge and technology from foreign investment. That's traditionally how countries recover on the back of being open and having exports and investment links. But all of that is a big ask, and I think it's more the domestic challenges I would stress for countries in Southern Europe than perhaps the external ones.